Hi everyone, this is Brett Senkis, the Right Brain business lawyer and a business consultant. And this video is a video about mastering M&A. It's specifically about earnouts in the M&A context, or what I call getting paid later. Now, I've talked and written about different ways to get a purchase price. Obviously, everyone knows what a purchase price is in the M&A context. When you sell a business, the buyer pays for the business. That's the purchase price. Now, the purchase price can come in different forms. It can be partly cash, partly seller financing. It could be in the form of stock of the buyer of the business. So now you have their paper. If they're a public company, hey, that's great. There might be a little bit of a lockup period where you can't sell that stock, but after that, it's freely tradable. It's easy to realize cash on it. If it's a private company, who knows? If they give you their paper, their stock, it may be a long time until you can find a buyer for that, or until that company goes public or gives you an opportunity to realize cash for those shares. That's all about different forms of the same set purchase price, different ways you can receive the purchase price, and they carry pros and cons. Earnouts are more about variable purchase price. So with an earnout, if the business performs in a certain manner, hits certain metrics in the hands of the buyer after the closing, the buyer will pay the seller an additional amount, or amounts, depending on the structure. So the business literally earns the purchase price. The business in the hands of the buyer earns the purchase price for the seller. Or very commonly, and we'll talk more about this in a few moments, the seller or sellers will go with the business, and they'll actually work the business, continuing in their roles, continuing in their same positions for the buyer, and actually earn additional compensation post-closing. So the earnout is about, again, a variable purchase price, and it's fundamentally about sharing risk. It's about aligning the incentives of the seller and helping the buyer helping the buyer with some of the risk that comes with buying a business, because absolutely buying a business carries a lot of risk. The data is out there. Half of these are public company mergers and acquisitions, but fully half of them fail to realize positive shareholder value. So buying a business is risky, and you might know everything about your business, and you might even have, the buyer might even be involved with you in some manner. It might be a customer or a supplier or something, but they still don't really know what it's going to be like to buy your business. So an earnout is a way to help them share risk. Now, from your perspective, I know, you want to be paid today. Everyone does. You want to be paid the maximum amount right now in cash. Yet that's not always possible, and so I think you should warm up to earnouts for two main reasons. One is it might allow you to receive more money, right? You should be, in a vacuum, you shouldn't have the exact same purchase price if you're paid in cash versus your expectation on an earnout. That's not a fair sharing of risk. You're taking some risk for the buyer. You're helping stay committed and show your commitment to the business post-closing. You should have an opportunity to earn more than you would otherwise, right? That's number one. Number two is you simply may have to accept an earnout, right? To have any opportunity of selling your business. This is particularly true when the business fundamentally carries, the transfer of the business carries considerable risk. And that might be the case because you have significant customer concentration, right? You're kind of all in on one or two customers, or the business clearly operates around you. You're really fundamental to it. There's things that a buyer is going to be thinking, look, I might want that business, but it's just way too risky if you aren't dialed in, seller, and if you're not working and helping me realize value. Or if I lose that one big customer, I'm in a lot of trouble as a buyer. So I might force you to take some of that risk. The market might force you to take some of that. Okay, so let's say you get really good, that an earnout makes sense for you. You either have to deal with it or you decide, hey, I can make more money this way. Be very, very careful of earnouts where you're not going with the business, where you don't have control over the business post-closing. So if you sell to an individual, right, and you go sip cocktails on a beach while the individual runs it, the risk is quite simple. You have no idea how that individual will perform, and whether or not they'll treat the business like you did, whether or not they've got the ability to grow that business. So there's that risk of who's performing. It's not you. If you sell to a larger business, you have that same risk, but you have additional risks when you sell to a larger business. So they already have product lines and service lines and departments and divisions and all that stuff. You're going to be one more business over there. Having a lack of control carries an additional risk, not just that they might not perform as well as you, but that they might chop your business up. They might move part of it over here. They might put someone in who's very expensive. This happens all the time, and it's not for insidious conspiratorial reasons. The corporate might say, look, that division, your business in the hands of the corporate after closing needs to bear some of this corporate overhead, right? Everyone's paying some of the executive salaries at the corporate level. So they might push down operating expenses that change the profit and loss of the business. They might still be growing the top line, right, the revenue, but not growing the bottom line. And so on that point, earnouts come in all sorts of different flavors. But fundamentally, the business needs to achieve certain metrics. So I've worked on them where you have to have a certain amount of customer retention, a certain amount of employee retention, a certain amount of revenue retention, a certain amount of revenue growth, a certain amount of EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a measure of profit. So you could come up with any of these things. But if you do the bottom line, EBITDA or earnings, net income, then any corporate overhead that's being pushed in there, right, and the corporation is taking it from another division, right, the overall parent company, and putting it in this division, the business you sold to them, and that's going to lower the bottom line, reduce the profits. And that might be just fine for them, but it's not just fine for you. So earnouts work best if you go with the business, right? If you're going to continue to run it, then you want to be very careful to negotiate as much as you can in the purchase agreement about how that earnout's going to work. That you have control over the profit and loss statement. That any corporate overhead is limited to a certain amount of corporate overhead. They shouldn't be pushing in new expenses and things like that. You could talk about things like acceleration. So you would want to, ideally, an employment contract, right? If the earnout's 2 years, which is pretty common, 3 years sometimes, more than that is fairly rare. So in a 2-year earnout, you would want a firm employment agreement, which you don't see employment agreements a lot in private companies, but you would negotiate for one that says, you can't let me go, Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, unless you pay me out for the earnout. Unless it's for cause or certain other things that they would have a right to let you go. But otherwise, you want to have control. You want to have certainty that you'll be there. You want to have some protections that the parent isn't going to push other expenses down there, that they won't make decisions on your behalf for how the business should run that affect you. I've been successful getting provisions that say things like, to the extent buyer takes an action that should reasonably be deemed as impeding the ability of the seller to earn the earnout, earnout's owed. So you want to kind of get into the weeds and figure out, okay, this is great. I'm selling my business. I have a chance to earn more money. That all works for me. The devil's in the details on those earnout provisions to make sure that you've got the control you need, that the buyer isn't playing games or just doing what they do to run the rest of their business without a lot of concern about whether or not you hit your metrics, right? So these things I'm talking about are way down in the weeds, but they're super, super important. Don't gloss over them. They're going to be highly negotiated, right? The buyer will say, we're buying the business. It's ours to run. We can't agree to all those things, but they will sometimes. So it just depends. You want to negotiate as much as you can. Again, most buyers, I'm not suggesting they're going to be unfair, but they're just not as concerned with you as actually getting paid that earnout. In fact, they're quite a bit less concerned. They want the business to transition well, which is why earnouts work. They align interest and share risk, but they don't necessarily need you to hit that particular metric for them to still define things as success. So you got to get into the weeds on that stuff. But warm up to earnouts. They're a great tool to align incentives. Might make your business a lot more marketable. If you've had problems with earnouts, I'd love to hear from you. If you think they're the greatest thing ever, I'd also like to hear from you on that. Thank you for stopping by today.